Hello and welcome to the New Look Post Sports Live. I'm your host, Jonathan Forsythe, and joining me from the brand spanking new Post TV studios, LeVar Arrington, office linebacker, Mike Wise, Washington Post columnist. Not at all, not anymore. And Dan Steinberg, the DC Sports Blog. How you doing, Dan?
I'm okay. I didn't realize that you'd be able to see my sneakers on the new set. I'm gonna have to upgrade my footwear.
Well, that's right. This is a more laid-back, casual show. You guys did it up nice for the relaunch of the show. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Again, reminder, you can hit us on Twitter at PostSportsLive. Today we've got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about Operation Patience, which is underway down in Richmond for the Redskins. We'll start off with some early training camp takeaways. We're going to talk about whether or not the injuries, like how much that's going to throw off the defense early in the season, and the suspension, some of that news coming out of camp. We've got an interview with Dave Sheinin about his new book, RG3, The Promise. We'll talk to him, catch up with him later via Skype. We'll finally hit on some Nationals news. The big news over the weekend being that Drew Storen was sent down to Syracuse, and Tyler Clippard, obviously a good friend of his, had some strong words about that. I'll ask for your guys' opinions on it. And the Wizards, are they about to sign John Wall to a max deal? Certainly seems like it. We'll ask to see if you guys agree that that's a good move and whether or not he's worth a max deal. First things first, Mr. Arrington, I want to get your early impressions from the first week down in Richmond for the Redskins at training camp.
I think outside of the injury news and the suspension news, as you mentioned, I think the excitement that is surrounding this training camp with the new facility, the fans' participation, I think that the numbers have been ungodly with attendance. I think it's exciting. I think they have reason to be excited, and that's so far. That's kind of my takeaways, because you can't take too much else from there in terms of from my perspective. I think it's great that there's a lot of participation from the fans.
Does that? I mean, it can't surprise you though that there's new facility, new area.
You'd be surprised as it applies to the Redskins fans are generally very supportive. That's something that you can honestly you can count on from the Redskins faithful. But the numbers have exceeded what they normally are doing, and I think that's interesting.
Mike, what are your early impressions, takeaways from camp?
The biggest thing, and I know I'm RG3 centric on this, but I was so waiting for that first press conference, and I wanted to see who the first person was to ask about his relationship with Mike Shanahan. Well, it was Robert Griffin III who dropped it in an answer, unprompted, and to me that said everything. That said everything about we've got to remain on the same page. Whatever divisions that people wanted to create or believe might still be there, and I still believe there are some friction left over from the training camp, I think Robert Griffin III wanted to dismiss those the first time he spoke to everybody, and I think that was as big as anything on the field. I think that was as large as anything that happened so far in training camp.
Definitely a calculated quote there from RG3. Yeah. Dan, what are your takeaways early on here from Richmond?
I mean, first of all, I do agree with LeVar. I think it's cool to get out of town. I think it's cool to really activate that part of the fan base. And with the Ravens being so popular in Maryland lately, I think that Central Virginia really is like a huge center of Redskins fandom. But in terms of players, and I'm going to get caught into the same thing I get caught every single year of like looking at a wide receiver in training camp and getting all excited. But Aldrick Robinson seems to be a guy everyone's talking about, including RG3. When he was asked who he's been most excited about or who needs to get on the field more, he said we need to get Aldrick Robinson involved more this year. I mean, there's been so many wide receivers that we've gotten excited about in August over the last couple of years. But still, it seems to me like that's the guy with the speed that he has. The issue was sort of more working into an NFL offense. But if he can get that going.
Who did he call the goon squad?
Josh Morgan
and Pierre
Garcon. I mean, that's kind of cool if your quarterback's calling you
goon squad.
I think he said they're goons.
Hopefully this goon squad.
You just don't want the gooniness to come out like it did with Morgan when the game is on the line. But you do like to see them not take too much mess when they're out there on the field from your receivers.
LeVar, is there anybody else that's sort of raising eyebrows as far as you're concerned from camp? I mean, I know it's only a weekend.
Everything that I'm hearing, which is I'm excited to hear this because I'm one of the biggest critics, but I also want to be his biggest supporter, is Orakpo. I think that I'm hearing a lot of great things about his motor, his intensity level. It seems as though this young man is poised to get back to where he was and beyond. So it's a lot of talk about him.
I was shocked that the guy might actually sign an extension, and he would be saying contractually, because I thought he was on his way out if things didn't work out this year. So whatever his rehab, however it went, how much ever they think he's going to be a cog to this defense this year, I think it says volumes about his recovery.
Well, speaking of the defense, guys, I want to get your takeaways on LeVar. You touched on it briefly at the top. Obviously, the injury most recently to Keenan Robinson. Longer ago, but we knew about it.
That's a very big loss.
Adam Carricker.
Yes.
And then, of course, the suspension for Jarvis Jenkins.
Yes.
So those are 3 hits to the defense that right off the bat are going to have a big effect in the first 4 games of the season. I want to ask a tiebreaker format, and I'll start with you, Mike, on this. The question is, with those key injuries and the suspension, are the Redskins more susceptible to the run or the pass through the early part of the schedule, their first 4 games? Those first 4 games are Philly, Green Bay, Detroit, and Oakland.
I'm going to say, Jonathan, run, because when I remember Jarvis Jenkins from his first training camp a year ago, I thought to myself, this guy's a space eater. He looks he's a monster there, and he could plug up a middle almost like Vince Wilfork when he really gets going. So I'm going to say run, and that's based completely not on statistics, just based on eye test.
What would you say, Steins?
I would say pass, John. I mean, I think it's the same.
It's kind of contrived, but it's all right.
No, I think that they've got 3 rookies in the secondary who are probably going to be getting a decent amount of time. Hopefully not right away if they're not ready. But, I mean, they're going to be throwing these kids in for sure. And I think that's going to be the question is how well they can handle the pressure. Jenkins, I think a little bit of a disappointment last year. 2 years ago, there was so much excitement about him. But, to me, these are guys, I don't know that there's anything about any of the guys who've been lost so far that makes them any more than just kind of guys that can be replaced in the NFL. But the secondary was a big problem last year, and there's going to be young kids there this year. So that's the issue.
Depth, also a huge issue. Break the tie, LeVar. Run or pass?
I'm going to go with pass because it seems that they do fairly well even when they were poor against the pass last year with being able to stop the run fairly well. The reason why I say pass is, well, even the things that were just discussed by Mike and Dan, you'd have to assume not having Jenkins, Carricker not being in there again, that's going to make it difficult for Kerrigan and Arakpo if guys like Golston and obviously Bowen and Cofield don't step it up. If you don't have the confidence of your defense coordinator, I think this is what we discovered last year earlier in the season. If you don't have the confidence of your defensive coordinator, he is not going to call the type of defense that will allow for the secondary to have the type of success that they were able to have down that 7-game stretch. So it comes down to, will this defensive front 8, front 7 be able to carry the load with those injuries? They're very thin now. You don't have Jackson. You don't have Robinson now. You don't have Jenkins. You lost Lorenzo Alexander. You're thin. So I think they're more susceptible to the pass with all those givens.
So I want to follow up on the
defense. Can I change my answer?
No. You lose
really
this
good.
round, Mike.
Okay.
You lose this round.
Okay.
I want to ask the question, in the more recent news out of camp is D'Angelo Hall rolled his ankle yesterday. He's in a walking boot today, reports indicate. The question is, who's the most indispensable member of the defense? Who can the Redskins least afford to have to replace due to injury? LeVar, what do you think?
Fletcher, without a doubt. Again, Robinson's down. Lorenzo Alexander's gone, and obviously Jackson is on suspension. But not all those things aside, that is your undisputed leader. That is the quarterback of this defense. That is the leader of that defense, coach on the field. You can't lose London Fletcher. And him being at the end of his career, that
38.
makes it sound kind of interesting. But I don't think that this defense is the same defense without him on the field.
I can't believe I'm saying this, but D'Angelo Hall, he's the guy that couldn't bring down Jake Delhomme several years ago, but just for the same
Dez Bryant
exactly, and just
stretch.
for the same reason that LeVar said that this, and Dan harped on the fact that the secondary is so thin. Well, not only do you get a cover corner guy out there, but you also get a guy who's got a little edge and a little experience. And I just think D'Angelo Hall off this defense, while I wanted him gone several times a year ago, I think he'd actually be as well, I don't think as irreplaceable as London Fletcher, but very close.
He's right up there. Dan, who's yours?
I would say Ryan Kerrigan, just because I think he can make plays that no one else on that team has made. I'll also point out that our clock went from like 11 seconds straight to 5 minutes, and there was no buzzer. I feel like MLB umpires are running the clock system here or something.
This new studio's got some bugs, you're saying.
Well, we're still working out the kinks, the show rundown.
Okay, I know what you're saying.
I just want to, let our readers know.
So Kerrigan is your answer because of his playmaking ability.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's right.
It makes sense.
He's a good guy, too.
He's just a good guy.
Yeah.
All right, I want to transition, guys, to an interview that we taped with the Post Dave Schein yesterday via Skype. He comes to us from Baltimore, from his home, about his new book that hits the shelves later in August 6th, I believe. It's called RG3, The Promise.
Big RG3 is.
One season.
You have established writers for the Washington Post publishing books within 1 year removed from his career.
Oh, he spent a
amazing.
season covering him in depth with some real access issues too, but he really gets behind the scenes and gets some great stuff. It's a fascinating read. Let's go ahead and hear from Dave more on the book. Joining us via Skype from his home in Baltimore is Post reporter Dave Schein, who just finished writing a book called RG3, The Promise. Hits the bookshelves on August 6th. You can pre-order your copy on Amazon.com now. He's got some book signings later in August. Dave, thanks for joining us on Post Sports Live.
Thanks for having me.
Dave, you spent an entire year chronicling RG3, even before the Redskins drafted him. I want to ask you first, what surprised you the most?
I think what surprised me the most was the lack of surprises. You come into this with a certain natural cynicism as a journalist, and you always assume the story is too good to be true, and no one could possibly be as perfect as Robert Griffin III. And then the deeper I got into the story, rather than tearing down the story and finding all these skeletons and whatnot, it just became even more of an amazing picture of this young man. And so I guess the surprising thing was that it was all real. It was all genuine and even better than I would have imagined.
Dave, from basketball to track to football, as you go through in your book, is there anything that RG3 can't do?
I think the one thing he has trouble with is saying no. I apply that not just to autograph seekers and interviews and sponsors and stuff like that, but also saying no to himself. That became really the fatal flaw for him, was this inability to, or this hyper competitiveness that manifested itself at the end of the season when he wouldn't take himself out of the Seattle game and actually fought Mike Shanahan to keep him in the game. That's the one thing I guess he doesn't do well is say no to himself or to others.
A lot of the talk in the offseason, given the injury and the recovery, is about the Redskins offense and wondering whether or not they'll run less read option and pistol formation kind of stuff. Do you expect that the Redskins will do less of that as a result of his injury from last year?
I think that was going to occur naturally anyway. Whether or not he got injured, I think the offense was going to evolve in the second year. I think there was probably going to be less running of Griffin and more passing, just by the nature of the NFL and the way that defenses acclimate to the new thing, to the new phenomenon. This is off season. The defensive coaches got to work and they went and visited college coaches, the college defensive coordinators to learn about stopping the zone read. And I think that's going to manifest itself in 2013. And so Robert Griffin III and the Redskins offense, as well as offenses like Seattle's and San Francisco's, were going to evolve this year anyway and perhaps feature that zone read even less than they did in 2012.
Dave, I want to get back to the book for a moment. What was your biggest challenge through writing the book?
The biggest challenge, without a doubt, was the access or the lack thereof. As I said, after training camp began, Griffin essentially was off limits to the media, other than network partners, Fox and ESPN and stuff like that. There were no one-on-one interviews, or I should say, there was one 5-minute one-on-one interview per media outlet on the Monday after the bye week. And that was pretty much the only time anybody in the print media got one-on-one time with Griffin, and it was 5 minutes, and it was literally 5 minutes. And the way the season ended made things even tougher for me because I was promised a sit-down interview with Griffin after the season ended, And the way the season ended with the knee surgery, that clearly was not going to happen. And, you know, Robert, quite understandably, went pretty deep underground after the season ended, after the surgery. So I didn't get that interview. So luckily I had built up a lot of material from speaking to him and his family way back in March and April of 2012, even before the draft. So I was able to construct this narrative out of that. But access to my subject was a difficult thing to overcome, no question.
Thanks a lot for your time, Dave. Again, the name of the book is RG3, The Promise, written by Dave Sheinin, the Post's finest. Thanks for joining us on Post Sports Live, Dave.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan.
All right, so now I want to introduce a segment, guys. Following that, let's call it RG 3 minutes. Yeah. You guys like the play on words there?
Yeah,
3 minutes
fine, but let's
on
talk
RG3.
more about Sheinin. What was that, Mission Control from Mars? Yeah, right. Get a Skype machine.
Dave didn't have the best connection from his home in Baltimore,
Sheinin?
apparently. I want to ask Mr. Steinberg, he's LeVar. RG3 mentioned Operation Patience yesterday in the media. He's got to be patient, take his time, getting back up to speed. How much of a difference is the knee brace going to make if he's going to be in that all season long? What do you think?
You're asking me as someone who has spent so much time running around in a knee brace.
Do you ever have to wear a knee brace to work?
I've never worn a knee brace. You know, I think that there's obviously some physical restraints that would put on, but I think by the end of last year, you saw that it wasn't really holding him back much. Even, I mean, people said maybe there's like a mental aspect to it, and I think that maybe initially, but you know, by the end of the year, the offense was rolling again. Whether or not he had the bulky knee brace or the smaller knee brace that he put on later, I don't think that's going to be a huge issue for him. I really don't.
He definitely wasn't running the same for sure in that knee brace. But yeah, you're right. The offense was still moving. You're right. LeVar, you've worn a knee brace before. How much does it restrict your movement?
It does restrict your movement, but as I stated off camera, he still blew his knee out with a knee brace on and with a heavy wrap. Mm-hmm. So it restricts you. It changes your natural movements of that joint in particular. But again, I think that if someone is going to have success with a knee brace on, it'd probably be someone who is used to it, someone who has had an opportunity to do it before. RG3 has played with a knee brace before. He's had the whole offseason to train with that knee brace and become one with it. So it'll be interesting to see how he adapts and adjusts to it, because if you guys recall, I mean, he forgot to put it on at one point in time, and during times during last year, yeah, he didn't want to use it. Mm-hmm. It's something that it's a device that becomes kind of intrusive at times, and so it'll be interesting to see how he reacts to it.
I'm with LeVar. I do think that at some point you get used to. I wore one for a lot of years. There are certain columns I wouldn't write when I wore a knee brace. I just wouldn't. They were just too off the wall and too out there. Yeah. Okay, Steinberg.
It's just not even like a small smile.
No.
For that one.
I did. While I was running, while I was playing basketball, I did it for years. It's almost like, you remember when they give you a little giraffe or an elephant when you're a kid and you have a security blanket? Mm-hmm. That's what a knee brace is. But once the game starts, once the competition starts, that's it. You don't even think about it again.
So I think that I think he's carrying the ball less this season. I don't care what anyone says in any press conference. So. He will carry the ball fewer times this season, and he's not going to be running. I mean, I don't think he's going to run for any 76-yard touchdowns this season.
But then that now creates the question: can he and Alfred Morris and this offense have the same type of success if he isn't the catalyst of this offense?
And that's a good question that we will talk about in a future episode of Post Sports Live as we get into the season. And it's as, like Dave mentioned in the interview, the evolution of this offense, he thought either way, knee injury or not, was going to evolve.
They're going to give us another week after this?
Yeah, we're going to keep going, I think. We got this nice new space. Let's transition on to the Nationals, guys. And they're showing signs of life after dropping the first 6 after the All-Star break. They've won 4 of their last 5, 3 in a row. But I want to focus on the move that made news over the weekend, and the move from Rizzo to send Drew Storen down to Syracuse, and the strong words from his best friend on the team and roommate Tyler Clippard afterwards. Was it the right former roommate? Was it the right move, Dan? Do you think, to send Storen down?
You know, and I think I'm probably going to disagree with my buddy Mike Wise here, who wrote a column on this earlier. I think that they probably could have massaged the situation a little bit better from the beginning. But I don't see how you could possibly argue with this move. It was to the point where you would be reluctant to put Drew Storen in a game, and I think fans would be terrified to see him come in virtually any game. His slider wasn't doing what it used to do, which was the pitch that made him so successful. And I mean, I understand that he has feelings. I understand that personalities are involved. But if you're trying to make the playoffs and you have a reliever who you do not trust to put into a baseball game, I don't see how you could really argue with the actual move of letting him go down and try to work some things out.
Mike?
This was a culmination of bad chemistry that developed in that clubhouse. And a lot of the relievers, when I wrote that column a couple of weeks ago, several of them told me off the record that, well, now Clippard, I can divulge one. No, and essentially what they were saying was, look, it's not we didn't like Rafael Soriano. It was a great acquisition. He was the best closer available, but to just throw a guy under the bus for one game. Drew Storen was coming off a 43 save season before he got hurt. I think the Drew Storen situation is less about him and more about how the Nationals treat their employees that aren't Scott Boras clients. In payment, and then it goes down to Mike Rizzo, who wasn't even extended and actually didn't get the kind of deal that he should have got from the Lerners. I think it's clear that Drew Storen, there's a lightning rod. He has made people in that clubhouse think, geez, that could be me in a heartbeat. And I also think Davey Johnson mismanaged him this year. I think, to be honest, Clippard, ironically, should have been in more situations that Storen was in, and Storen could have been more effective.
Clipper is having he's one of the few bright spots of the team this year, really the opposite of his buddy Storen. Storen's 5.95 ERA, opponents are batting almost 300 off him. LeVar, was it the right move to send him down?
I'll say this. When a team is not living up to the expectations and the standards of what's been positioned, there's nothing off limits. That's what you got to understand. You win, you don't have to worry about these things. When you lose, and believe me, I played in an era for the Washington Redskins where that was very evident. After a loss, hey, where's, oh, he's gone. Oh, you come in on a Tuesday, oh, you see like 9, 10 guys getting ready to go outside and work out for the team. When you lose, you open the door for any type of discussion or decision to be made. That's the reality that surrounds professional sports.
But
LeVar,
let me ask you this. When you were scapegoated, I thought, in 2005.
Thank you.
And Greg Williams kind of made you out to be this freelancing guy at the basically.
Like I do on this show.
Yeah, and so I thought to myself at the time, I even wrote it, like, how do you treat a guy that's actually put in this kind of work and effort and was the face of the franchise before Joe Gibbs came on? To me, all I thought about was why. I'm not saying Drew Storen's body of work was your body of work, but I'm saying there's ways in which you treat employees that work for you and that are valued employees, and there's ways you don't.
But then you have to take into consideration, you have to look at what are the ultimate goals of that team, what's the ultimate goals of the organization. And depending on what that is in the war room that only the upper management knows, those decisions are made based off of that. So it's generally, sometimes it's personal, but I would say in the professional ranks, it's really about the business. It's the business aspect of how things are being impacted. And quite frankly, they felt like they could go a different direction and be okay. They had a high-ranking defense, so they felt like they could go a different direction without me being on the field. As this applies to Storen, he's not even that big of a cog in what's going on with the Nationals, and they are struggling. And as Dan mentioned, people are nervous about him going out there and taking the mound. Once you lose confidence and once you see a team that should not be struggling the way that it is, you are susceptible to any type of situation taking place.
Was a huge, huge part of this team's future as recently as last year, and he's been in the minor leagues for.
Losing to LeVar's point, losing in the last 17 seconds that we have, guys. Do we see Storen again in a Nationals uniform later this year?
Yes.
Yes, Game 7 of the NLCS. He'll shut down the Braves.
Yes or no?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think we see Danny Espinosa in a Nationals.
Espinosa too. That's a bold prediction
Where,
right there. We're not even doing a bold prediction segment. All right, guys. The buzzer just went off. That means we have to move on to our final segment, which is the Wizards. Let's talk about John Wall, guys. It all accounts seem that he's in line for a max contract. Reports around a 5-year, $80 million deal. I guess the question here is this somewhat inevitable, Dan? Do you see this as something the Wizards have to do? And secondary, does John Wall deserve it?
I'm going to say yes, it was inevitable. I mean, everything we've heard from this team is how they're rebuilding behind this young backcourt. It wouldn't make any sense at all from any sort of marketing or team building standpoint to, after having all that talk, to watch him walk away. That wouldn't make any sense at all. Does he deserve it? You know, the numbers have been, we talked about the numbers, maybe not by the numbers. To me, the biggest concern through all of this is the health thing. Just, you know, and we talked about it a lot last year, is the way he plays, is his body going to stand up to kind of the speed that he plays at and to the injuries that he's had before? If he does, I think that you are tied to this guy, and this is the guy that you're trying to build around, him and Beal. I don't see how you would get away from a max contract.
Any question that's prefaced, is he worth it, I think you have to confine to the franchise alone. If you said, is he worth it to an NBA team, well, the Los Angeles Clippers, no. They already have a first-flight point guard. The Washington Wizards don't, and he is their face of the franchise, for lack of a better term. And so I think just like Drew Holiday wasn't worth it, Roy Hibbert probably didn't deserve a max deal last year, but he got one. He was important to Indiana. And so I think in that way you had to pay John Wall. I know LeVar is just going to shoot this down completely and disagree with me, but I don't care.
LeVar, your take?
You know, my take on it is, on the court-wise, do you give someone who's never been an all-star or considered to be an upper echelons player a max contract? That's first and foremost. You look at it from the common sense perspective.
Well, in Washington, we do that, though. Jason Worth.
And you can come to that conclusion. But here's the deciding factor for me. Coach Randy Whitman believes in this young man. After numerous conversations with the coach, he believes that the maturity level, even with Ernie Grunfeld, these guys believe that this young man will mature into the player that will be an upper echelons, first flight, first tier point guard and player in this league. If you're basing what you feel this young man will develop into, if we're talking right now, here and now, is he a max contract guy? It's no. If you're talking based off of potential of the understanding of the player that you believe he will develop into and what this team will develop into with the guys that are on this team, with Porter and with Beal being a part of it, then I think that the common sense answer is yes.
And being an apologist, as I so often am, you know, last year, going into the year, we said this is going to be the year where we sort of see what kind of player John Wall is, what kind of player he's going to grow into. And I think that got short-circuited the same way it did for the whole team because of that injury and because of Nene being out. And the whole season was almost a wash in a way until the last couple months. So, I mean, I feel like that we're going to say this fall the same thing we did last fall. This is going to be a huge year to kind of judge him.
But you could make an argument, can't you guys, that once John Wall came back to that 4-28 team, 5-28 team, they were a different team. They looked like
100%.
They were following their leader down the court.
It was the catalyst. You know, another thing that you got to take into consideration here is this is a contract year for the GM and for the coaching staff. So there's a lot riding on John Wall being the player that he needs to be. He didn't come into the season healthy last year. We are hoping that Bradley Beal comes into the season healthy. And you hope that Otto Porter can develop into what he needs to develop into, and guys like Webster can have another year, and it wasn't just a fluke one-year deal for him, that these guys are going to prove out. I think if all those elements play out, then John Wall has a fair opportunity to kind of emerge and move into, transition into that place that we've all felt that he could. But if all those things don't fall into place, it'll be interesting to see what happens with John Wall, but you know what's going to happen to everybody else. It won't be a Randy Whitman coaching this team. It won't be a Ernie Grunfeld GM in this team. So the house is on John Wall's shoulders, so he has to be that guy.
This year, too, because all those guys are going into their final year of their deal. Grunfeld, Randy Whitman. Ted Leonsis has not made any bones or efforts to re-sign any of those guys yet.
Well, the other four NBA point guards who have max deals, Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook, Rose in Chicago, and Darren Williams. We'll see if John Wall can sort of live up. Obviously, those guys also have a better supporting cast.
Darren Williams, I wouldn't have given a max deal.
With John Wall having better support and young blood sort of to run with him, I think that there's a lot of potential there. We'll see if he can live up to it. All right, for Dan Steinberg, for Mike Wise, for LeVar Arrington, I want to thank all you guys for joining us in the new comfy confines of the Post TV studio.
Good job.
Next week we'll be joined via Twitter by Nats beat writer Adam Kilgore. We'll catch up with the Nats to see how they're bouncing back off of a road trip to Detroit and Milwaukee. And otherwise, we'll see you guys right here next week, next Tuesday. Thanks for joining us on Post Sports Live.